The driver did not look at her when he said it. He said it to the horizon, or to the dust, or to no one in particular, the way men say things they have already decided are final. Your ticket's got a false name on it. I don't haul liars. And then Alma Fitch's trunk hit the ground beside the wheel ruts of the Carver's Bend Road, and the sound it made, the hollow thud of everything she owned landing in October dirt, was the sound of a decision being unmade for her. She was standing on the coach step with her smaller bag clutched against her chest, and she did not move. The other passengers had gone very quiet inside. She could feel them through the thin wooden wall. "The name on the ticket is A. Whitmore," she said. "My middle name is Whitmore. It is on my birth record. I have it." "Your fare receipt," says Alma Fitch. The driver, a square-jawed man named Pickett, whose collar was ringed with old sweat, leaned over the rail and pointed at the road. "Station master in Glendale wired ahead. Said a woman named Fitch, left owing a dispute in St. Louis. I don't haul disputed passengers." "I don't owe anything in St. Louis," Alma said. Her voice was flat and steady. She had practiced keeping it that way for the last 3 weeks. "Any dispute you're referring to is a private matter between a man who thinks he owns me and the fact that he does not." Pickett stared at her. Not with cruelty exactly, with the impatience of a man who has a schedule. 9 miles east," he said. "Road's dry. Weather'll hold till evening." He picked up his reins. Alma stepped down. She did not argue further, because she understood, with the cold clarity that had carried her from St. Louis to here, that arguing with men like Pickett used energy she could not spare. She walked to her trunk, assessed its weight, and determined she could drag it 40 feet at a time before needing to set it down. 9 miles would take the rest of the day. She had 5 hours of light. She did the math. She was still doing it when the coach rolled away and left her with nothing but the wind moving through the dry grass and the sound of her own thinking. Her name was Alma Fitch. She was 27 years old. She had been a telegraph operator for 5 years, first at the Western Union office on Chestnut Street in St. Louis, then at her father's dry goods office when he could no longer afford to pay someone else for the work. She had managed his correspondence, his accounts, his supply orders, and his reputation, and she had done it well enough that a man named Howard Brackett had noticed. Not her work, her. Brackett was 53, a cotton broker with 3 warehouses and a dead wife, and the specific confidence of a man who had never been told that wanting something was not the same as deserving it. Her father had debts. Brackett had offered to forgive them. The arrangement had been presented to Alma on a Tuesday evening over a supper she had cooked herself, as though the fact that she'd made the meal somehow made the conversation easier to swallow. She had stood up from the table. She had gone to the telegraph room. She had sent a wire to the postmistress in Carver's Bend, Wyoming, who had advertised for an operator 3 weeks prior. Then she had gone to bed. The next morning she packed 2 bags and she left. Now she stood in the road with the trunk at her feet and $14 in her coat pocket, and she did what her mother had taught her to do when things fell apart. She made a list. What she had: the trunk intact, the smaller bag intact, $14.20, a letter confirming the telegraph position in Carver's Bend, dated 6 weeks ago, a wool coat, her telegraph key wrapped in flannel at the bottom of the trunk, which she refused to leave behind even when the weight of it made the dragging harder, 4 crackers in a paper sleeve, the knowledge that 9 miles was approximately 3 hours on flat ground, and she had 5 hours of light. She picked up the smaller bag, leaned into the trunk, and began. She had moved it perhaps 40 yards when she heard the wagon. It came from behind her, from the west, a steady creak and roll that announced itself the way working wagons did. No hurry, no drama, just something that knew where it was going. Alma stepped to the side of the road. She did not wave it down. She stood with her spine straight and let it approach, because she had calculated the situation and decided that visible but not desperate was the right position. The wagon was a cattle rancher's rig. She knew this because she had spent 5 years processing supply orders and freight manifests, and she could read a wagon the way some women read dress patterns. Working bed, canvas cover, 2 draft horses with the calm gait of animals that had done this road before. The man driving was somewhere in his middle 30s, broad-shouldered, hat-brim darkened at the front edge from years of weather. He saw her. He slowed. He stopped. He looked at the trunk in the road. He looked at her. He did not look at her the way Pickett had, or the way Brackett had, Or the way the men at the St. Louis office used to look when she corrected their transmission errors. He looked at her the way a person looks at a problem they are genuinely trying to understand. "You all right?" he said. "I've been better," Alma said. "I've also been worse. The stage put me off." He studied the trunk. "That yours?" "It is. Carver's Bend is 9 miles. "I'm aware." He was quiet for a moment. One of the horses exhaled, a long, considering sound. "I'm going through Carver's Bend," he said. "I can take you in the trunk, or I can keep going. Up to you." It was the way he said it. Not charity and not calculation. Just a fact laid out flat, take it or leave it. Alma had spent enough years sorting mail and signals to know the difference between a message and a trap, and this had the clean transmission of something simply true. "Thank you," she said. "I'll accept." She did not wait for him to help with the trunk. She got one end and looked at him until he got the other, and they lifted it into the wagon bed together without ceremony. She climbed up to the seat herself. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they moved. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Alma used the silence to observe. The wagon was well maintained. There was a rifle under the seat in good condition. In the bed behind them, 2 coils of new wire fence, a crate marked with a ranch brand she didn't recognize, and a leather satchel that smelled of cattle medicine. Not a man passing through, a man going home. "Alma Fitch," she said. He glanced at her. "Seth Darrow, rancher." He looked back at the road. "What takes you to Carver's Bend?" "Telegraph position. Postmistress advertised in June." Seth Darrow was quiet for a beat, and the quality of that silence had texture. Not awkward, careful. "Nell Gruber," he said. "She runs the post office." "She's the one who posted the position. Do you know her?" "Everyone in Carver's Bend knows Nell Gruber," he said, and he did not elaborate on what kind of thing they knew, which was itself a kind of information. "Is there something I should know?" He seemed to decide something. "Nell filled the position about 3 weeks ago. Her nephew came through from Denver, needed work." Alma turned that over. The letter in her coat pocket, with its careful penmanship and its promise of steady wages, was now worth exactly what a letter is worth when the person who wrote it has already moved on. Nothing. "I see," she said. "You're still going?" "I have no particular reason to go back," she said. "Whatever else Carver's Bend is, it's 900 miles from St. Louis. The distance hasn't changed." Seth Darrow looked at her then, a quick sideways look that contained something she couldn't fully name. Not pity, not admiration. Something more like recognition. "Fair enough," he said. They rode on. The land opened up around them. Wyoming autumn laid out in every direction, the mountains blue-gray in the distance and the grass gone gold, and Alma found that she had been right about one thing. It was as wide as people said. She had thought they were being dramatic. She revised the opinion. "The stage driver said I had a disputed ticket," she said after a while, because she had found that telling the plain version early saved considerable time. "The dispute was this: a man in St. Louis believed I had obligations to him. I disagreed. I left. He apparently sent word ahead." Seth kept his eyes on the road. "What kind of obligations?" "He and my father made an arrangement," she said. "I was the arrangement." A beat of silence. "You weren't part of making it." "I was informed of it," Alma said. "The way you're informed of a weather change. Here is what will happen. Bring a coat." She kept her voice even because the evenness was something she had earned. "I chose not to bring the coat." Something moved at the corner of his jaw, almost a smile, almost. "Smart," he said. "Stubborn," she said. "My father calls it stubborn. My mother used to call it honest." "What happened to your mother?" "Fever. 3 years ago." She did not elaborate because some things said simply are said completely. She would have found the whole situation infuriating. She had opinions about women being used as currency. "She was right," Seth said. "Yes," Alma said, "she was." They came into Carver's Bend at dusk, the town announcing itself the way frontier towns did, not gradually, but all at once, a collection of buildings appearing out of the land as if they'd simply decided to be there. Main Street was unpaved and honest. A general store, a hotel, a livery, a blacksmith, a post office no bigger than a generous closet, a saloon, a church at the north end. People noticed the wagon. People in small towns always noticed wagons and drew conclusions about what was in them. Nell Gruber found Alma at breakfast the next morning. She arrived at the table the way small-town postmistresses move through a room, with the specific gravitational authority of someone who processes everyone's information and knows it. She sat across from Alma without being invited, which told Alma everything she needed to know about how Nell Gruber operated. "You're the woman Seth Darrow brought in," Nell said. "I came with Mr. Darrow, yes," Alma said. "I believe you had a correspondence with me in June." Nell's expression did the thing Alma was beginning to recognize in this town. A complicated shift that contained information it wasn't quite saying yet. "The position's filled," Nell said. "I know," Alma said. "Is there other wire work in Carver's Bay or bookkeeping? I can do both." Nell studied her for a long moment. "Seth's ranch records are a disaster," she said. "He hasn't had anyone keeping books since his wife passed. 3 years of backlog by now." She paused. "He won't ask. He doesn't ask for things." "Then I'll offer," Alma said. Seth Darrow looked startled when she found him at the livery that afternoon, which was the second time she had seen him look anything other than deliberately settled. "I keep books," she said without preliminary, "and I run wire. Your records need attention. I need income. Fair wage, 3 days a week, and I find my own way out there." She paused. "Nell Gruber told me you wouldn't ask, so I'm asking instead." He looked at her for a long moment, with the careful expression of a man who is recalibrating. "Monday," he said, "I'll send a wagon." The Darrow Ranch was 8 miles north of town, which Alma learned on Monday morning and again on every visit thereafter. The main house was solid and undecorated, built by a man who thought about function and let aesthetics manage for themselves. The barn was better cared for than the sitting room, which told her something. The records corner of the kitchen had grown over several years into a geological formation of paper, invoices, cattle tallies, land deeds, wire receipts, correspondence from a livestock broker named Fuller Cade going back 3.5 years. She stood in the doorway the first morning and felt the particular calm she always felt when confronted with disorder that had a solution. 3 years, she said. "Closer to 4, Seth said from behind her. There was something in his voice, the low-grade embarrassment of a capable person confronting evidence of a thing they'd let go too long. "I'll need a week to build a system before I can work the numbers. After that, I can tell you where you actually stand." "Take what you need," he said. "Coffee's on the stove." He went to his work, she went to hers. She was 2 days into sorting the cattle sale records when she found the first discrepancy. Fuller Cade was a livestock broker out of Cheyenne who handled Seth's annual cattle sales, negotiated the prices, processed the contracts, took his commission, and sent Seth the remainder. The invoices were consistent and neat. The problem was the prices. Alma had grown up transmitting commodity wires. She knew what cattle sold for in Wyoming across the past 3 years because she had sent those numbers down the line week after week at the Western Union desk. And the prices on Fuller Cade's sale records were low. Not dramatically, not the kind of low that hit you on first reading. The steady, quiet kind. 5% under market, sometimes 7%. Always just enough to be invisible if you weren't comparing against the actual wire record of what the market bore. A mistake was possible once, maybe twice. Consistent undercutting across 11 transactions was not a mistake, it was a pattern. And patterns, as her old supervisor used to say, have deliberate causes. She set those invoices in their own stack and kept working. By Wednesday of the following week, she had a number. $290, traceable across 3 years. She carried it to Seth at midday and put the summary sheet on the table between them. "Fuller Cade has been shorting your cattle receipts," she said, "consistently across 11 transactions. Not by much on any single sale. Enough to be invisible if you weren't comparing against market rates. In total, I can trace approximately $290. There may be more in the earlier years I haven't reached." Seth looked at the sheet. He picked it up. He was quiet in the way of someone absorbing a blow he hadn't seen coming. "How did you find it?" he said. "I know what cattle sold for. I transmitted those prices for 5 years. The numbers on his invoices don't match the market rate from the same week." She paused. "It's the kind of fraud that works because the difference on any single sale is too small to question. Over 3 years, the difference is $290. Seth set the sheet down. He looked at the window. $290 is real money. "He counted on you not looking," Alma said. She kept her voice plain because plainness was more useful than comfort. "He was wrong to count on it." Seth looked at her then with the careful, full attention she had come to recognize as his version of an important moment. "You've done this kind of work before," he said. 5 years of transmissions, 4 of bookkeeping, she said. "My father's office. The kind of place where the difference between what the ledger said and what was actually there determined whether we ate. I learned to look." Something in his face settled, not into pity, which she was grateful for, but into understanding. "The man in St. Louis," he said, "the one who arranged things with your father, was your father's business that far under?" "Far enough that I looked like a solution," she said. "I was not a solution. I was a person." She met his eyes. "I left before he could confuse the two permanently." That was a Thursday. On Monday, a man from Cade's office showed up at the ranch. Alma was alone. Seth was at the north pasture, the 2 hands with him. When she heard the unfamiliar horse, she went to the window before she went to the door. The man dismounting was perhaps 45, well dressed in an Eastern way, with the posture of someone who carried other people's authority like a borrowed coat. He knocked. She opened the door. "Looking for the ranch owner," he said. "Seth Darrow." "He's not here. I keep the ranch records. Can I help you?" The man looked past her into the house with the quick inventory scan of someone assessing the situation. "Business matter," he said. "Best discussed directly." "I handle the accounts," Alma said. He shifted. "And you are?" "The person who handles the accounts," she said. "Leave your message with me or come back when Mr. Darrow is available." He left. She added his description to the notes she'd been keeping in the back of the ledger. The time, what he'd said, the specific direction his eyes moved when she told him she handled the accounts. The people who underestimated you always looked a certain way when they recalculated. She had learned to record it. Fuller Cade came himself on a Wednesday. Seth was there. Alma was there. Marshall Dunning, whom Nell Gruber had telephoned before any of them, was also there, which Alma suspected was less coincidence than Nell's particular brand of logistical management. Cade came in with the smooth confidence of a man who had navigated difficult conversations before and emerged from all of them intact. He sat down, he spread his hands. He said there must be some confusion about the numbers, that livestock pricing was complicated, that honest errors over a long accounting relationship were not uncommon. Alma put the summary sheet in front of him. 11 transactions, she said. 3 years, each priced below the market rate I can document from the same week's wire transmissions, which I personally transmitted. She held his gaze. "I'm not suggesting arithmetic errors. I'm presenting a consistent pattern of underpayment totaling $290 that correlates exactly with your brokerage margin on every sale." Cade looked at the sheet. He looked at Marshall Dunning. He looked at Seth, who sat with his arms on the table, and the flat, patient expression of a man who has given someone enough rope and watched them use it. "I'd like to make this right," Cade said. The smooth tone was gone. "290s, Alma said, "and Mr. Darrow will be finding a different broker for future sales." Outside afterward, Marshall Dunning tipped his hat at Alma with the directness of a man who gives compliments the way he gives warnings, once, meaning them fully. "Good records," he said. "Good fraud leaves tracks," she said. "You just have to know where to look." He almost smiled. He went back to his office. She and Seth stood in the October street, with the light going gold at the edges of everything. "He'll pay," Alma said. "I'll track it to make sure he does." "Of course you will," Seth said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite warmth, and was exactly warmth. "This is what I do," she said. "It's not remarkable." "Alma," he said. He used her name rarely enough that she felt it each time. "You came to this town 2 months ago with a trunk and $14, and no job," he said. "You just recovered $290 for a man you met on a road." She looked at him. "That's what the work is for." He was quiet for a moment. "Not everybody does it." The man from St. Louis arrived 3 weeks later. His name was Orville Steck, thin-faced, city shoes on country roads, carrying the particular confidence of someone who believed the document in his jacket pocket was the end of the conversation. Nell Gruber told Alma about him before Alma had finished her morning coffee because that was how information moved through Carver's Bend, through Nell, with precision and without delay. "Checked in last night," Nell said over the post office counter. "Asking where you work, how long you've been here, whether you have family in the territory." She folded her hands on the counter. Tom at the hotel says he's carrying papers. Alma set her cup down. She already knew what kind. Brackett had the kind of money that bought the appearance of documentation, and she had known since St. Louis that this was possible. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything difficult, by knowing her facts, knowing the other person's arguments, and being unwilling to move from what was true. She told Seth that evening. He listened without interruption, and when she finished he was quiet for the specific beat that meant he was ordering what he knew. "He'll claim I agreed to the arrangement," Alma said. "I didn't sign anything. I was shown a document in June. I did not sign it. My father was in the room and he knows exactly what happened." She paused. "Whether my father will say so is a different question." "Write to him," Seth said. She had been thinking the same thing and not wanting to. It was the correct move and the difficult one, and the difference between correct and easy had stopped mattering to her a long time ago. She wrote the letter that night at the hotel desk, 3 drafts before she had the version that said what needed saying without excess. She mailed it in the morning and went to work. Orville Steck came to the ranch on a Thursday, timed for when he likely assumed Seth would be out. Seth was not out. Alma had mentioned the probable timing the night before, and Seth had rearranged his day without being asked to. Steck sat across the kitchen table with his city shoes and his single-page document, and the smile of a man who believed the smile was doing work. He said Miss Fitch had entered into an agreement with Mr. Brackett in good faith. He said there were obligations to be honored. He placed the document on the table between them. Alma looked at the document. She looked at the place where her signature was supposed to be. "I didn't sign this," she said. "With respect." "I didn't sign this," she said again in precisely the same tone. "My father was present on the date listed. He will confirm that I left the room without signing. If a signature appears here with my name, it is not mine." Steck's smile adjusted itself. Seth said, from where he stood at the edge of the room, with the quiet, settled presence of a man who has put everything else down, "I'd like you to take that document to Marshal Dunning's office, today, before you speak to anyone else in this town." He looked at Steck without any particular heat. "Because if you go around Carver's Bend, making claims about this woman, you'll find that Marshal Dunning has been here 14 years and he knows the difference between a legal instrument and a piece of paper with the right number of official-looking words on it." Steck looked at the two of them. The calculation on his face was visible. The recalibration of a man who arrived expecting one kind of terrain and found another entirely. "I'll be in touch," he said. "We'll be here," Alma said. He left. She heard his horse on the road for a full minute before the sound faded west. Seth crossed the room and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "You all right?" he said. "I've been better," she said. "I've also been worse." She looked at her hands. "That was the conversation I've been bracing for since St. Louis. I didn't know if I'd hold it." "You held it before I came in," he said. "I know," she said, "but it helped having someone at the door." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said her name, the way he said it, once with intention. "This ranch has been quiet for 3 years," he said. "Since my wife passed, I built the south fence and regraded the north pasture and expanded the herd, and myself that busy was enough." He stopped. "It was enough, mostly. Then it stopped being enough and I'd stopped noticing the difference, because there wasn't anyone to notice it with." She did not look away. She understood what he was saying, and she understood what it cost him to say it, without asking anything back. "That's not a question," she said. "No," he said. "I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you what's true." She had prepared, somewhere in the back of her mind, for several versions of this conversation. The cautious version, the conditional version, the version that would require her to manage someone else's hope before she was ready to address her own. She had not prepared for this one, the plain declaration of a plain man who meant exactly what he said. "I came here with nothing," she said, "and I built something. My own work, my own name in this town, my own standing." She needed this said first. "Whatever happens next, that's mine. It stays mine." "Yes," he said immediately, "it does. I'm not looking to be kept." "I know that," he said. "I've watched you for 2 months." She looked at him across the table, where she had built a functioning record system out of 4 years of accumulated chaos, in a house that had been closed to the ordinary business of being inhabited. She thought about the road, and the trunk in the dust, and the list she'd made of what she actually had. The list was longer now by a considerable measure. "All right," she said. Her father's letter came 5 weeks later, 3 pages, which was more than he had ever voluntarily written to anyone in her memory. The handwriting started steady and grew smaller by the final page, the way writing does when a person is still deciding what they are allowed to say. He wrote that he had been in the room in June, and she had not signed, and he had watched her not sign, and he had told himself afterward that Brackett would give up, and he would not have to account for what he'd done. He wrote that Brackett's man had come to him as well, carrying a document with a signature that her father did not recognize as hers, and that he had told Brackett directly that the signature was not real, and that he would say so to anyone who asked, under any oath required. He wrote, at the very end, in the small, tight handwriting of the final page, "I know what I traded you for. I know it doesn't come undone. I hope you found somewhere worth being. Your mother always said you would." Alma sat in the post office with 3 pages in her hands, and the October wind against the window, and the specific weight of a thing that had been pressing on her for months finally shifting, not lifting, not disappearing, but changing its character. Acknowledged, set on a table and named for what it was. She did not cry. She sat with it fully for a minute, the way she had learned to sit with difficult things, without managing them into something smaller than they were. Then she folded the letter, put it in her coat pocket, and went to find Seth. He was at the general store, in town for supplies. He looked up when she came in and read her face the way he read weather and fences, not with dramatic alarm, but with the focused attention of someone who is genuinely paying attention. "Letter came," she said. They stepped outside where the street gave them space, and the wind covered the edges of the conversation. She told him. He listened without moving except to listen harder. "He confirmed it," Seth said, "the signature." "He'll testify to it," she said. Seth was quiet. He stood beside her in the October street and did not fill the space with words it didn't need. "How do you feel?" he said. "Not what does this mean? Not what happens next. What did she feel?" "Like something I'd been carrying for a long time just got a little lighter," she said. "Not gone. Just lighter." He nodded. He understood that too. "Come to supper," he said. "Nell's. She'll know something happened the moment she sees us, and she'll pretend she predicted it." "Did she predict it?" "She predicted everything," Seth said. "She just lets us think we're surprising her." Alma laughed. The real kind. The kind that doesn't wait for permission. They ate at Nell Gruber's table that evening, the 3 of them, while Nell talked about the new family that had come from Nebraska and the North Road that needed regrading before winter. She made no direct reference to whatever she had read in their faces when they arrived, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The careful generosity of a woman who knew when people needed the ordinary thing and gave it without announcement. Steck left Carver's Bend on the morning stage 5 days later. Nell confirmed it with the brisk satisfaction of someone whose patience had been vindicated. Brackett sent no one else. Alma opened her telegraph office 3 weeks before Christmas, in the back room of the general store that Archie Plum rented her at a rate that suggested Nell Gruber had been involved in the negotiation. She strung the wire herself. She mounted the key herself. She put her name on the sign outside in lettering she painted on a Tuesday evening, while her breath came out in cold clouds, and the temperature dropped, and she felt, in the quiet and the smell of paint and the particular satisfaction of finishing a thing, that this was entirely hers. Seth asked her on a February evening when the stove was going and the last transmission had been sent, and the ledgers were balanced and closed. He said he was not going to pretend he hadn't been thinking about how to say it longer than was probably necessary. He said he knew what she had built, and that it was hers. He said the ranch was different than it had been 8 months ago, and he didn't want it to go back to what it was before. She looked at him across the small table in the back room of the general store, where her telegraph key sat in the center of the desk, and the record books stood in the order she had imposed on 4 years of accumulated chaos. "Yes," she said, "on the condition that the office stays open." "I never said close it," he said. "I'm establishing it in advance," she said. "Alma," he said. "The office stays," she said. "For as long as you want it," he said. She had wanted it as long as there was work to do, and in Carver's Bend, she was finding, there was always work to do. The wire came in every morning at 11. The records needed keeping. The town needed someone who could look at a column of numbers and find the quiet lie sitting in the middle of it. That was what she did. That was hers. It had always been hers. She had just needed the road, and the trunk in the dust, and the specific cold arithmetic of a list made at the side of a wheel rut in Wyoming to show her how much of it she was already carrying. It had been longer than she thought. It had always been longer than she thought.